Mark Thompson stared through the shuttle's viewport as the swirling blue-green world of Blue Haven grew larger. His heart raced with excitement. After 3 years of preparation and 6 months of space travel, he was about to become the first human xenobiologist to study a mysterious wave species up close. The planet's surface was almost entirely covered in water, with only a few scattered archipelagos breaking the endless ocean. But what caught his attention were the massive floating cities that dotted the planet's surface like giant water lilies. Their structures glowed with a soft, bioluminescent light that pulsed in rhythm with the waves below. "Preparing for final descent to Capital City," announced the ship's eye. "Please secure all loose items." Mark double-checked his equipment bags. Inside were the tools of his trade: sample collection devices, analytical scanners, and most importantly, his waterproof research tablets. The Waves had specifically requested a human scientist for their exchange program, though they hadn't explained why. That mystery was just one of many he hoped to solve during his 6-month stay. The shuttle descended through the atmosphere, and Mark got his first close look at the floating metropolis below. The city was a marvel of organic architecture, buildings that seemed to grow from massive platforms, all connected by transparent tubes filled with water. The entire structure moved with the ocean, yet remained perfectly stable. As they approached the landing pad, Mark noticed something unusual. The gathering crowd below was much larger than the standard welcoming committee he'd been told to expect. Hundreds of waves had gathered, their translucent bodies glowing with patterns of excitement. The shuttle touched down with a gentle splash. Mark took a deep breath and activated his atmospheric filter. While the air was breathable, it had a higher moisture content than Earth standard. He grabbed his bags and walked to the airlock. The moment he stepped out, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The waves' bioluminescence flickered rapidly, a sign of strong emotion in their species. Mark had studied their biology extensively, but seeing it in person was different. Their humanoid bodies were almost completely transparent, with visible organs that pulsed with colored light. They moved with an otherworldly grace, equally comfortable in water or air. "Welcome, honored Mark Thompson," said a tall wave, stepping forward. Its internal organs glowed a deep blue, marking it as someone of high status. "I am Blue, High Priest of the Temple of Forms. We have long awaited your arrival." Mark bowed slightly, following the cultural protocol he'd learned. "Thank you for your welcome. I look forward to learning from your people." But something was off. The title High Priest hadn't been mentioned in any of his briefing materials. This was supposed to be a purely scientific exchange. He noticed the waves closest to him were making gestures he didn't recognize, touching their transparent chests and bowing deeply. "If you would follow me," Blue said, "we have prepared the ceremonial examination chamber." "Examination chamber?" Mark asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I was under the impression I'd be going to the research facility first." Blue's body pulsed with patterns that Mark's translator didn't catch. "The examination is traditional, required for all visitors of your unique form." The crowd parted as Blue led Mark toward a large structure that looked more like a temple than a laboratory. The walls were covered in ancient markings that seemed to depict solid, opaque beings, strikingly similar to human anatomy. Mark's scientific curiosity warred with his growing unease. None of this had been in the mission briefing. As they walked, he noticed more waves joining the crowd, all staring at him with an intensity that went beyond normal xenological interest. "Your internal structure," Blue said suddenly, "it is truly contained. Solid throughout." "Yes," Mark replied cautiously. "That's normal for humans." Blue's entire body lit up with joy. Then the prophecies were true. The solid one has come. Mark realized his 6-month research mission had just become far more complicated than he'd ever imagined. As the temple doors opened before him, he couldn't help but wonder what exactly these people saw when they looked at him, and why his normal human anatomy seemed to hold such mysterious significance for them. The examination chamber was unlike anything Mark had expected. Instead of medical equipment, the circular room was filled with ancient murals depicting beings that looked surprisingly human. The walls sparkled with bioluminescent crystals, casting everything in a soft, blue glow. "Please stand here," Blue said, gesturing to a raised platform in the center of the room. A group of wave elders had gathered around, their bodies pulsing with excited colors. Mark stepped onto the platform, feeling more like a specimen than a visiting scientist. "I need to contact the Earth Embassy about this. This wasn't part of the agreement." "The embassy has been informed," Blue replied, his internal organs swirling with patterns of reassurance. "This is merely a formality. A great honor, actually." The elders began to circle Mark, their transparent bodies moving in perfect synchronization. One of them held up what looked like an ancient scroll, made from some sort of waterproof material. "The prophecies speak of beings whose wisdom is contained within solid walls," Blue explained, his voice filled with reverence. "Those whose life essence stays hidden and protected, not exposed like our own." He gestured to his own transparent body, where every organ was visible. Mark's scientific mind began working overtime. "You're saying your religion predicted human anatomy?" "Look here," said another elder, pointing to the scroll. The drawing showed a cross-section of a being with distinct internal organs, bones, and muscles, a surprisingly accurate depiction of human anatomy. "This sacred text is 5,000 cycles old. It speaks of the coming of the Solid Ones, who would bring great change to our world." Mark studied the drawings carefully. His unease was slowly being replaced by fascination. "These are remarkably accurate anatomical drawings. How is this possible?" A younger wave stepped forward from the group. Unlike the others, his glow was more subdued, more controlled. "I am Ray, chief scientist of our biology institute. I've studied these texts my entire life." His pattern of lights suggested skepticism, a familiar sight to Mark from his scientific training. "The traditional interpretation," Ray continued, "is that our ancestors were given these visions by the gods. But now that you're here," he trailed off, his lights pulsing with what Mark recognized as scientific curiosity. Blue raised his arms, addressing the gathered crowd. "The prophecy speaks truth. The Solid One's form matches our sacred texts exactly. Every organ protected, every life-giving process shielded from harm. Truly, this is the perfection our ancestors foresaw." The crowd's collective bioluminescence created a dazzling light show of religious fervor. Mark caught Ray's eye, noticing the scientist's more reserved reaction. "This is a significant moment for our people," Ray said quietly to Mark, "but perhaps not for the reasons they think." Before Mark could respond, Blue approached with a ceremonial robe made of shimmering, waterproof material. "You will stay in the temple quarters, honored Solid One. We have much to learn from each other." "Actually," Mark said firmly, finding his voice, "I'm here as a scientist. I need to stick to my research schedule and—" Of course," Blue interrupted smoothly. "The prophecies speak of great knowledge exchange. Your research can continue. But surely you understand now why you must stay here, where we can protect and honor you properly." Mark looked around the room, seeing the hope and excitement in the waves' glowing bodies. He thought about his research mission, his diplomatic responsibilities, and the incredible scientific opportunity before him. These people had built an entire religion around the idea of protected internal organs, and now he, a regular human scientist, had unwittingly become their living proof. "I'll stay," he said finally, "but I have conditions. I need access to my equipment, regular contact with Earth." And he glanced at Ray, "Collaboration with your scientists." Blue's body lit up with joy. "All will be arranged. The time of revelation has truly begun." As Mark followed Blue out of the chamber, he caught one last glimpse of the ancient anatomical drawings. Something about them nagged at his scientific mind. They weren't just accurate. They were precise, almost like technical diagrams. The mystery was deeper than simple religious prophecy, and he was determined to uncover the truth. 3 weeks had passed since Mark's arrival, and Blue Haven was changing. The streets of the floating city were filled with religious processions, their participants glowing with patterns of devotion. Vendors sold crude sculptures depicting solid, human-like forms. Even the children had started playing a new game called Solid, where they held their glow still and pretended to have fixed organs. Mark watched it all from his quarters in the temple, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with his role in this cultural upheaval. The room they'd given him was a strange mix of laboratory and shrine, with his scientific equipment arranged around a ceremonial platform. "The crowds are getting bigger," Ray said, entering the room. The wave scientist had become Mark's closest ally in recent weeks. Yesterday, a group walked for 10 days across the ocean just to catch a glimpse of you. Mark sighed, putting down the tissue sample he'd been analyzing. "This isn't what I came here for. I'm a xenobiologist, not a religious figure." "To them, you're both," Ray replied, his body glowing with patterns of concern. "Look at this." He held up his tablet, showing Mark the latest news. Crowds of waves were gathering in cities across the planet, all demanding to see the Solid One. A soft chime announced another visitor. Blue entered, his usual smooth movement now sharp with excitement. "Wonderful news, Honored One. The Council of Elders has agreed. We will begin the Grand Revelation ceremony next week." Mark straightened up. "What ceremony?" "This is the first I'm hearing about it. The prophecies say the Solid One must share their wisdom with all," Blue explained, his patterns glowing with religious fervor. "We will broadcast your examination to every city on Blue Haven." "Absolutely not," Mark said firmly. "I'm not going to be part of a planet-wide religious ceremony." Blue's glow dimmed slightly. "But the prophecies are not my concern," Mark interrupted. "I'm here for scientific research, remember." Ray moved between them, his patterns showing mediation. "Perhaps we could find a compromise, a scientific demonstration instead." Before either could respond, another wave burst into the room. It was one of Blue's junior priests, his glow pulsing with alarm. "High Priest, there's trouble in the South Quarter. The traditionalists are protesting. They're saying—" He glanced nervously at Mark. "They're saying the Solid One is a false sign, that accepting him will anger the gods of the deep." Blue's entire body flashed with patterns of anger and concern. "Heresy. They dare question the sacred texts." Mark watched the exchange with growing worry. He turned to Ray. "Traditionalists. Not everyone welcomes change," Ray explained quietly. "Some believe our transparency is sacred, that solid forms are an abomination. They've always been a small faction, but your presence has given them new purpose." The junior priest continued. "They're gathering followers, High Priest. Some are calling for the Solid One to be sent away. Others, his patterns showed fear. Others are calling for more drastic measures." Mark felt a chill. "Are they threatening violence?" "Our people haven't known violence in generations," Blue said, but his patterns showed uncertainty. "Still, these are unusual times." "That's it," Mark said, reaching for his communicator. "I'm contacting the Earth Embassy. This has gone too far." "Wait." Blue's patterns shifted to desperation. "You can't leave now. Your presence is causing a great awakening among our people. Yes, there is some resistance, but change is never easy. Please, give us time to show you the truth of our beliefs." Mark looked between Blue's desperate hope and Ray's scientific concern. Outside, he could hear the chants of the faithful, while somewhere in the city, protests were growing. His simple research mission had somehow placed him at the center of a cultural revolution. 3 days, he said finally. "Give me 3 days to think about this ceremony. But I want to know everything. The full prophecies, the history, all of it. No more surprises." Blue's body lit up with joy, while Ray's patterns showed relief tinged with worry. Neither of them noticed the small drone hovering outside Mark's window, its lens focused on the scene inside, transmitting to unknown watchers. The Earth Embassy's holographic representative flickered in Mark's room, looking concerned. "This situation is becoming unstable. Dr. Thompson. We've received complaints from 3 different alien species about preferential treatment of humans on Blue Haven. Mark ran his hand through his hair in frustration. I understand, but the rigid ones from Europa 7 are particularly upset, the diplomat continued. They're saying if solid anatomy is considered sacred, their crystalline bodies should be worshipped too. This is turning into an interplanetary incident. Before Mark could respond, Ray burst into the room, his body glowing with excitement. Mark, you need to see this immediately. He paused, noticing the hologram. My apologies for the interruption. We'll continue this discussion later, the diplomat said. Remember, Dr. Thompson, you're a scientist, not a religious icon. Try to keep things under control. The hologram disappeared. Ray held up his tablet, showing images of ancient cave paintings. These were just discovered in the deep temples. The sea levels dropped enough for us to access them for the first time in centuries. Mark leaned closer, his scientific curiosity overtaking his diplomatic concerns. The images showed detailed drawings of beings that looked remarkably human, walking upright, with solid bodies and internal organs drawn with surprising accuracy. The markings date back over 10,000 years, Ray said, his patterns showing a mix of excitement and confusion, long before our written history began. That's impossible, Mark muttered. Humans hadn't even developed space travel then. We couldn't have been here. Their discussion was interrupted by Blue entering the room, followed by a group of alien visitors. The aliens were a mix of species, some gaseous, some crystalline, some with forms that barely made sense to human eyes. Honored Solid One, Blue said, his patterns showing stress. These representatives wish to question our sacred traditions. A crystalline being stepped forward, its facets glinting. If solidity is divine, surely our form is even more perfect than the humans. We demand equal recognition. Our gaseous nature represents true enlightenment, another alien argued, its form swirling. Solid matter is primitive, not sacred. Mark held up his hands. Please, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not here as a religious figure. I'm a scientist. Then explain these, Ray said suddenly, projecting the cave paintings onto the wall. The room fell silent. The images were unmistakable. Beings with solid bodies, dressed in what looked like ancient spacesuits, interacting with early waves. One painting clearly showed the beings teaching something to a group of transparent figures. These are genuine, one of the alien representatives asked, their tone suddenly serious. Verified by our best archaeological tools, Ray confirmed. They're real, and they're old. Very old. Blue's body was pulsing with rapid patterns of revelation. Don't you see? Our ancestors knew. They were visited by the solid ones before, and they left us these prophecies. Or, Mark said slowly, a theory forming in his mind, they left something else. Ray, remember those anatomical drawings? They weren't religious texts. They were medical diagrams. What if someone was here before, teaching your ancestors about different forms of life? The room erupted in discussion. The alien representatives huddled together, speaking in urgent tones. Blue's patterns showed a mix of confusion and wonder. Through his window, Mark could see more crowds gathering in the streets below, their bodies glowing with anticipation of his next public appearance. Ray moved closer to Mark, speaking quietly. If you're right, this changes everything. Not just for our world, but for the history of galactic civilization. Mark nodded, watching the chaos unfold around him. He'd come to study alien biology, but instead might have stumbled upon evidence of ancient interstellar contact. As the arguments continued around him, he couldn't help but wonder, who were these ancient visitors, and what else had they left behind? Deep beneath the floating city, Mark and Ray descended in a pressurized exploration pod. The ancient temple complex lay below them, its structures barely visible in the murky depths. They had convinced Blue to let them investigate the underwater ruins, though the high priest insisted on monitoring their progress from above. These temples were built before our people learned to live on the surface, Ray explained, his bioluminescence providing extra light in the dark water. Most of them have been flooded for thousands of years. The pod's lights revealed massive stone structures covered in coral and sea plants, but what caught Mark's attention were the doorways. They were designed for beings much taller than the waves. "Look at the size of these entrances," Mark said, checking his scanner. "They're almost exactly human height." Ray guided the pod through an ancient archway. "The stories say our ancestors built these temples to honor the star teachers. We always thought it was just a legend." They reached a large chamber that their scans had identified earlier. The pod's mechanical arms cleared away centuries of sand and debris, revealing a sealed door covered in strange markings. "Those symbols," Mark said, leaning closer to the viewport. "They're not wave writing." Ray's body pulsed with excitement. "No, they're not. And look at this." He pointed to a panel beside the door. "It's a handprint scanner, but it's too large for wave hands." Mark felt his heart race. "It's human-sized." They looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. Mark put on his pressure suit while Ray adjusted the pod systems to prevent flooding. Minutes later, Mark was standing before the ancient door, his suited hand hovering over the scanner. "This is either going to be the discovery of the century," he said through his comm, "or a complete disappointment." He pressed his hand against the panel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum that vibrated through the water, the panel lit up with a soft blue glow. The door slowly began to open. "By the deep," Ray whispered, his whole body glowing with amazement. The chamber beyond was perfectly preserved, sealed against the ocean for millennia. Their lights revealed what looked like a research station. Ancient displays lined the walls, and in the center stood a pedestal with a device that was clearly not of wave origin. "This is advanced technology," Mark said, examining the displays. "But it's old. Really old." Ray was studying the ancient writing on the walls. "These are research notes. Medical studies about different species' anatomical structures." His patterns showed growing excitement. "Mark, they were doing comparative biology studies, teaching our ancestors about life on other worlds." Mark reached the central pedestal. The device looked like some kind of database or teaching tool. When he touched it, it hummed to life, projecting holographic images into the water around them. "It's a xenobiology database," Mark breathed. "Look, there are hundreds of species here, including early humans." The projection showed detailed anatomical studies of various alien species, including ancient humans. Each entry included medical data, biological adaptations, and environmental requirements. "Our entire religion," Ray said, his patterns showing a mix of awe and shock. "It wasn't about prophecy at all. It was based on scientific knowledge left behind by these visitors." Mark nodded slowly. "They weren't gods or mystical beings. They were scientists, just like us. They came here to study and teach." "But why did they leave?" Ray asked. "And why did this knowledge become wrapped in religion?" Before Mark could answer, their comms crackled with Blue's voice from above. "Have you found anything? The crowds are getting restless up here." Mark looked at Ray. They both knew this discovery would change Wave Society forever. The question was, how should they reveal it? "We need to be careful how we handle this," Mark said quietly to Ray. "This isn't just about destroying old beliefs. It's about helping your people rediscover their true history." Ray's patterns showed agreement. "Perhaps this is what the ancient teachers intended all along, for us to eventually understand the truth on our own." The answer to one mystery had only led to more questions, but one thing was clear. The relationship between humans and waves was far older and deeper than anyone had imagined. The great hall of the Temple of Forms was packed with waves, their bodies creating a dazzling light show of different emotions. Mark stood on the central platform with Ray and Blue, facing the angry crowd. The traditionalists had finally made their move, and now the entire city was in chaos. "The Solid One brings corruption," shouted Stone, leader of the traditionalists. His body flashed with aggressive patterns. Our transparency is sacred. These claims about ancient teachers are lies. The crowd's glow pulsed with conflicting colors, some showing support for Stone, others defending Mark. The discovery in the underwater temple had leaked out, though no one knew the full truth yet. Brothers and sisters, Blue tried to calm the crowd. The prophecies were never prophecies, Stone interrupted. This human has turned our holiest beliefs into some kind of scientific study. He must leave. Mark stepped forward, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Your beliefs aren't wrong. They're just incomplete. What we found in the deep temple. Silence. Stone's patterns flared brightly. We've already sent a message to the Earth Embassy. Either you leave voluntarily, or we'll make you leave. Ray moved to Mark's side, his glow showing protective patterns. You're threatening violence. That goes against everything our people stand for. So does worshipping solid forms. Stone countered. Look what this human's presence has done to our society. Markets are closed. Children no longer attend schools. Everyone's too busy celebrating or protesting the solid one. Mark had to admit Stone had a point. The city had ground to a halt in recent days. Religious fervor and protests had disrupted normal life. Even now, he could see through the temple's windows that the streets were filled with arguing crowds. There's something you all need to see, Mark said, pulling out the data device from the underwater temple. The truth about your history. Suddenly, the temple's lights went dark. In the confusion, someone rushed the platform. Mark felt himself being pushed, nearly falling off the edge. Ray's quick grab saved him. When the lights came back on, the ancient device was gone. This is your final warning, Stone's voice rang out. Leave our world, or face the consequences. Blue's patterns showed distress. You don't understand what you're doing. The device will be destroyed, Stone said firmly, along with the underwater temple and all its heretical technology. The crowd erupted in chaos. Mark could see fights breaking out between different groups of waves, their bodies flashing with angry patterns he'd never seen before. We have to do something, Ray said urgently. If they destroy that temple, we'll lose proof of our true history forever. Mark looked around the hall. This wasn't what he'd wanted. He'd come here to study alien biology, not tear apart an entire society. But now he had to make a choice. Leave and let the waves sort out their own problems, or stay and risk making things worse. His communicator beeped. The Earth Embassy was calling again, probably to arrange his evacuation. It would be easy to leave, to wash his hands of this whole situation. But then he saw the fear in Blue's patterns, the hope in Ray's, and the confusion in the crowd. They weren't ready for the truth, but they weren't ready to lose it either. No, Mark said firmly, ignoring his communicator. I'm not leaving. Ray's patterns showed surprise. But the traditionalists are about to make a huge mistake, Mark finished. We need to stop them from destroying that temple. And then, he took a deep breath. Then we need to find a way to help your people understand their true heritage. Blue's patterns shifted to determination. What do you need us to do? Outside, the sun was setting on the floating city, its light reflecting off the waves below. Somewhere in the growing darkness, Stone and his followers were heading toward the ancient temple, ready to erase thousands of years of history. Mark had only hours to stop them, and somehow save a civilization from tearing itself apart. Moonlight rippled across the ocean as Mark, Ray, and Blue raced toward the deep temple in their exploration pod. They had managed to track Stone's group thanks to the bioluminescent trail their angry patterns left in the water. They're already inside, Ray said, his glow dimmed with worry. His scanner showed multiple wave signatures in the ancient structure. Mark checked his pressure suit one last time. Remember the plan. We're not here to fight. We're here to show them the truth. The pod settled near the temple entrance. Through the viewport, they could see Stone's followers setting up demolition charges. The stolen teaching device sat on a nearby ledge, awaiting destruction. This is our heritage they're about to destroy, Blue said, his patterns showing determination. "I won't let that happen." Mark activated his suit's external lights and stepped out of the pod. The waves turned toward him, their patterns flashing with surprise and anger. Stone moved forward to confront him. "You dare to interfere?" Stone's patterns pulsed with rage. "Before you destroy everything," Mark said through his suit's speakers, "there's something you need to see." He pulled out a small projector from his suit pocket. "More lies," Stone scoffed. "No, truth." Mark activated the projector. The water around them filled with holographic images, but not of anatomical diagrams or scientific data. Instead, they showed wave children playing, families gathering, communities working together. "These images are from your own historical archives," Mark explained. "Your people living and working together despite their different beliefs. Your transparency never meant you had to all think the same way." Stone's patterns showed confusion. "What does this have to do with?" "Everything," Ray interrupted, swimming forward. "The ancient teachers didn't come here to be worshipped. They came to show us that different forms of life could coexist. That's the real message we forgot." Blue moved to the teaching device, his patterns gentle. "Our ancestors didn't build a religion around solid forms because they were perfect. They did it to help us remember that life comes in many shapes, and all are worthy of respect." The demolition team's patterns shifted, showing uncertainty. Stone's glow flickered with inner conflict. "Let me show you what's really in this device," Mark said, reaching for it. This time, no one stopped him. The device activated, but instead of showing just scientific data, it displayed a message. The ancient hologram showed humans and waves working together, learning from each other. A voice spoke in ancient wave language. "To those who find this," Ray translated, his patterns brightening with wonder, "we leave not orders or dogma, but an invitation. To learn, to grow, to reach for the stars knowing you're not alone in the universe." Stone's aggressive patterns faded, replaced by complex swirls of emotion. "All this time, we thought we were protecting our culture." "You were," Mark said gently. "But cultures don't have to stay frozen to survive. They grow, just like the life forms your ancestors studied." One by one, the demolition charges were removed. As the group surfaced, they found the city had changed. Word of the ancient message had spread through the wave's natural communication networks. The streets were no longer filled with angry crowds, but with people talking, sharing, trying to understand. Months later, Mark stood at the newly built Space Academy of Blue Haven. The floating city had changed. The Temple of Forms was now both a religious center and a scientific institute. Wave children learned about both their spiritual heritage and their scientific history. "The first Wave Space expedition leaves next month," Ray said, his patterns showing pride. He had been named lead scientist of their space program. "And the traditionalists?" Mark asked. "Stone is leading a project to preserve wave cultural heritage as we expand to the stars." Blue answered, his patterns peaceful. "He says we need to remember who we are as we discover who we can become." Mark smiled, watching Wave students practice in their new spacesuits, designed to protect while still celebrating their natural transparency. His research mission had turned into something far more important, a reminder that understanding comes not from erasing differences, but from embracing them. "Ready to head home?" Ray asked. "Actually," Mark said, "I think my work here isn't quite finished. Someone needs to help train your first xenobiologists." Their patterns glowed with joy as they turned toward the stars, a solid human and his transparent friends, taking the first steps toward a shared future.